Stop, there are some very important things you need to know before I get into this. The point of this video isn't actually to just look at the worst teams of the last decade, but rather at how all 32 teams have done on average over the last 10 years. This is 100% based on statistics, none of it is to do with my own opinion. And the statistics the ranking is based on is the draft order of the first round over the last 10 years. The only time NFL teams are actually officially listed best to worst is in the draft, and the first round takes into account tiebreakers like strength of schedule when two teams finish with the same record. So this year, for example, the Browns and the Titans both went 3-13, but the Titans got the first overall pick because they had an easier schedule, meaning that they had to play worse to end up with the same record as the Browns, who had a much tougher one. Most importantly, I'm not saying this is a great way of ranking teams best to worst. In fact, I don't even really care about making a list for that reason. I just thought it'd be interesting to look at it this way. If you want to be nitpicky, this is more of the most and least successful teams, but what determines how successful you are? Well, how good you are. What I did is went through the last 10 drafts in their original order and worked out every team's average draft position over those 10 drafts, and that is what this list is based on. I'm going to go through this list from top, so the best, to the bottom, so that as we get closer to the bottom and your team hasn't come up yet, you might start to sweat a little. Every team's average draft position is rarely a round number, so I've done some rounding up and down, and I'll also be showing every draft selection of the last 10 years in that position. So if a team averaged the 13th overall pick, I will show every 13th overall selection of the last 10 years. So let's get into this list. This one's bound to bring up some friendly discussions. The best team of the last decade, and by far I should add, are the New England Patriots. With an average position of 28th, they are 4 places higher than the next best. That means on average they at least make it to the divisional round every year. They also have the most playoff appearances of all teams in this period with 9, and they are of course this high because of their 3 trips to the Super Bowl and 5 consecutive trips to the AFC Championship game. Their lowest position was 22nd overall in the 2010 draft. The next one is a bit of a surprise based on that they only went to 1 Super Bowl in this period, but they did win it, and they are the Green Bay Packers with an average position of 24th. They're here off the back of 3 NFC Championship appearances, and despite their lowest position being 9th overall in 2009, the most noteworthy player going 24th is probably Dez Bryant. Imagine the Packers with him. This shouldn't come as a surprise considering that we're going back 10 years. Next up are the Indianapolis Colts with 2 Super Bowl and 4 AFC Championship appearances. Tied with the Packers but on a lower decimal average, the Colts rank this high despite holding the first overall selection in 2012. Then we have the Baltimore Ravens making it to 3 AFC Championship games and mixing in a Super Bowl win too. That's despite 2 years with very low positions of 8th in 2008 and 6th in 2016. Their position of 23rd is higher than age-old rivals the Steelers, beating them by 0.3, which was enough to round them up to 23. The Steelers have more Super Bowl appearances than the Ravens with 2, but less AFC Championship ones, which is 2 as well. Over 10 years, the Steelers are a little up and down, reaching their worst position of 15th twice in 2007 and 2014. The Seattle Seahawks are next on the merit of their first 2 and last 4 seasons, with some very low finishes in between. 2 NFC Championships, 2 Super Bowl appearances and 1 win get the Seahawks their perfectly round average of 21. That's in no thanks to their 4th and 6th selections in 2009 and 2010. The Broncos are here pretty much exclusively for the second half of the decade. In the last 4 years they made it to the Super Bowl twice and just missed out on the AFC Championship game the other 2 times. Their average position is also 21st and their lowest finish was 2nd in 2011. Then we have the Saints with an average of 20th. The Saints are pretty much the last team before things get wildly inconsistent. Their worst finish being 10th in 2008 with 3 27s and a Super Bowl win mixed in. 8 teams rank higher than the New York Giants despite no other team having won as many Super Bowls in the last 10 years. That's due to the Giants being crazily inconsistent. On either side of their most recent Super Bowl win, they have finished 19th, and in the last 3 years they've been 12th, 9th and 10th, giving them an average of 20th. We've now seen every Super Bowl winner of the last 10 years, and the 10th best team in the NFL might surprise you a little. It's the San Diego Chargers with an average position of 19th. they have 1 AFC Championship and 5 total playoff appearances. Their lowest position coming this year at 3rd. Next up are the Philadelphia Eagles, not making it to the championship game but making it into the playoffs 5 times, also averaging 19th and their lowest being 4th in 2013. Then we have the Dallas Cowboys, kind of forgotten in the playoff landscape in recent years, making it there 4 times and averaging 19th too, their worst finish being 4th this year. Then we have the Carolina Panthers with 4 playoffs and one of those of course a Super Bowl, but also the first overall pick in 2011 and 9th in 2012. Their average is exactly 18th. The Arizona Cardinals are about as up and down as it gets with an average of 18th. 5th overall twice in 2007 and 2011, and 4 playoff appearances split into 2 sets of 2 years. The New York Jets appear maybe a little earlier than some would expect, with 2 AFC Championship appearances in 2010 and 11. Their lowest finish is 6th, which they got in 2008 and 2015. Their average is also 18th, which would give them a pretty great collection of players. The Chicago Bears are next with an average of 17th. These 10 years include a Super Bowl appearance for them, as well as another NFC Championship one too. The Cincinnati Bengals made the playoffs 6 times in this stretch, so obviously over 50% of the time, but their average position is 17th outside of the playoffs. That's down to low finishes like 4th in 2011 and 6th in 2009. The Atlanta Falcons made it to the playoffs 4 times, one of those going all the way to the NFC Championship game. Their lowest place was 3rd in 2008 and their average is 17th. The Houston Texans have 3 playoff appearances averaging at 16th, and they too have a first overall pick from 2014. The San Francisco 49ers are the lowest ranked team to have a Super Bowl appearance in this period with an average of 16th. They're really interesting actually, as well as having 3 back-to-back NFC Championship appearances, they've had the 7th overall pick 3 times, in 2008, 11 and 16. The Vikings have 4 playoff appearances, one of those being in the NFC Championship game. Their average is 16th and their earliest pick was 3rd in 2012. The Titans only have 2 playoff appearances. Their average, although not great before, will have definitely dropped in the last 2 years as they finished 2nd and 1st, averaging 14th. We are now entering the top 10 worst teams. The Chiefs pretty much have as many terrible seasons as they have good ones, making it to the playoffs 4 times, as well as having the 5th, 3rd and 5th selections from 2008 to 2010, and the first overall selection in 2013. Their average being 14th. The Dolphins have made it to the playoffs once in 10 years, averaging 12th overall. With that position, they could have picked up Marshawn Lynch, Fletcher Cox, and Odell Beckham Jr. They also had the first overall selection in 2008. The Bills are the first team to not have made the playoffs at all, averaging 11th, a position they share with 2 other teams. The last 2 years have been their best. I wonder if they'd have been any better with JJ Watt on the team. I was actually a little surprised that the Redskins turned up this late, and they have made it to the playoffs 3 times. Their average of 11th comes from having 2 6th, a 5th, a 4th, and a 2nd overall selection. Next we have the Lions, and this period of course includes their 0-16 season. They've twice been 2nd overall and once 1st, and have been to the playoffs twice in this span, averaging 11th. Now we're down to the 5 worst. The positive here being though that it's pretty much looking up for all of these teams. At 5 we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with an average of 10th. They've been to the playoffs once, and if we'd gone back 15 years, we'd even have a Super Bowl win for them, but we didn't. Then we have the Jaguars, who have a playoff appearance to their name. They also average at 10th, but unlike the Bucs, haven't had a first overall selection. 10th wins them Gerard Mayo, Stephon Gilmore, and Todd Gurley. In 3rd place are the Rams with no playoff appearances, 3 2nd overall selections and a 1st. They've also never finished higher than 16th, always being in the bottom half of the league, averaging 9th. That could have gotten them Tyron Smith, Luke Kuechly, and Anthony Barr. If you know who's left, you can probably guess the order, although I feel most people already had a good idea of number 1 all along. But in 2nd are the Oakland Raiders, who have an average selection of 8th overall. The Raiders have also failed to make the playoffs, their best finishes being 17th in 2011 and 2012. And number 1, on average, the worst team in the NFL, and I take no pleasure in saying that, are the Cleveland Browns. Interestingly, they've never been the worst team in any given year, not having had a first overall selection in 10 years. They also had one season where they finished 10-6. On top of that, the poor Browns have to play 2 of the top 5 teams twice a year, every year. Now remember, if you don't like where your team ranked, don't blame me, it's all statistics. What I found most interesting is 1, as we got closer to the middle and bottom, we started seeing teams that have done very well in the last few years, or teams that are on an upward curve, and 2, that no one draft selection had more than like 4 or 5 great players. It just goes to show there's nothing close to a guarantee in the draft, even if you're selecting early in the first round.